The old house loomed, a silhouette against the dying light. Its darkened windows seemed to stare back at her, empty and soulless, as if the house itself was aware of her presence. The once vibrant garden was now overgrown, wild vines creeping up the walls, reclaiming what was once theirs. Jane stood before it, her breath catching in her throat. Memories of her childhood flooded back, each one tinged with a sense of dread. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell, tales of spirits and shadows that roamed the halls at night. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly sweet and unsettling. It was the scent of decay, of time long past. The fog seemed to cling to her skin, wrapping her in a cold embrace. She pushed open the creaking door, each groan like a whispered warning. The sound echoed through the empty halls, a reminder of the house's age and the secrets it held within its walls. Inside, dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced through boarded windows. The light seemed to struggle against the darkness, casting eerie shadows that moved with a life of their own. Shadows stretched, twisting familiar shapes into menacing forms. The furniture, once comforting and familiar, now seemed alien and threatening, each piece a potential hiding place for the unknown. Jane took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Each step felt like a journey into the past, a confrontation with the ghosts of her memories. The floorboards groaned under her weight, each creak echoing through the oppressive silence. It was as if the house was alive, reacting to her presence, acknowledging her return. She could almost feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, suffocating her. The memories were overwhelming, each one more vivid than the last, each one a reminder of why she had left. This house, her childhood home, had always held an unsettling energy, but now it felt amplified, raw and hungry. It was as if the house had been waiting for her, feeding off her fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. Jane knew she had to face whatever lay within, to confront the shadows of her past and find the strength to move forward. 8-year-old Jane stood on her tiptoes, her breath fogging up the dusty surface of the old ornate mirror. It was a fixture in her bedroom, a looming presence she both feared and was drawn to. Her reflection stared back, her wide, curious eyes magnified in the warped glass. A giggle, soft and melodic, drifted from behind her, sending shivers down her spine.
Hello?
The giggling stopped. Jane whirled around, her heart hammering in her chest. The room was empty. Shadows danced in the corners, cast by the flickering light of the street lamp outside her window. Slowly she turned back to the mirror, her eyes widening in terror. Staring back at her, a girl with long dark pigtails and eyes black as coal stood directly behind her reflection.
I know it sounds crazy, Sarah, but there's something not right about this house. Every night, it feels like the walls are closing in on me, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched.
Jane whispered into the phone, her voice tight with anxiety. She had never felt this way before, not even in her wildest nightmares. The house seemed to have a life of its own, breathing and pulsating with a sinister energy. She clutched the phone tighter, her knuckles white. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. She could feel the cold sweat forming on her forehead, trickling down her temples. The shadows seemed to deepen around her, twisting and writhing in the dim light. They moved with a life of their own, creating grotesque shapes that danced on the walls, mocking her fear.
It's just an old house, Janie. Maybe it's just the wind or the creaking of the old wood. Houses like that make noises, you know? You're letting your imagination run wild. You've always had a vivid imagination, and maybe it's just playing tricks on you now.
Sarah's voice, tinny and distant through the receiver, did little to soothe Jane's frayed nerves. The logical explanations seemed hollow, unable to pierce the veil of dread that had settled over her.
But the dreams, they feel so real. Every night I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I see faces, hear voices calling my name, and the noises. I keep hearing things, whispers, footsteps. They're not just in my head, Sarah. They're real. I can feel them.
A sudden crash from upstairs cut her off, followed by a chilling silence that seemed to scream louder than any noise. Jane's blood ran cold. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, a primal fear gripping her. The phone slipped from her grasp, landing on the floor with a dull thud. She stared at it, her mind racing. What was happening in this house? Was she losing her mind, or was there something truly sinister lurking in the shadows? Jane took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. She knew she had to get out, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The house seemed to be holding her captive, feeding off her fear. Gathering every ounce of courage, she turned and ran, not daring to look back. The house loomed behind her, its dark windows like eyes watching her every move. She had to escape before it was too late. Jane crept up the stairs, each step slow and deliberate, her hand trailing along the cold, damp wall. The air grew colder, heavier, as if she were ascending into some unseen, oppressive force. The musty scent of decay intensified, clinging to her nostrils, choking her. From the end of the hallway, a soft whisper drifted toward her, barely audible but undeniably real.
John!
She froze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The whisper came again, closer this time, laced with a chilling playfulness.
Come play with me, Jane.
Panic welled up inside her, threatening to consume her. She had to get out of this house, this place that held nothing but terror and despair.
Jane's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch, sending a shiver down her spine. The metallic scent of blood, faint but unmistakable, hit her nostrils, making her stomach churn. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open.
The room was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering in from the hallway casting long, eerie shadows. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay, of something old and rotten. The same sweet, sickening smell from her childhood nightmares clung to the air, suffocating her. She knew with a chilling certainty that she was not alone. The old mirror, its surface cracked and webbed with age, dominated the far wall. Jane's reflection stared back at her, her eyes wide with fear. In the depths of the cracked glass, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat.
There, in the reflection, stood the girl with the pigtails.
Her eyes, black and bottomless, seemed to bore into Jane's very soul. A mocking smile playing on her pale lips. The girl's image flickered, growing more solid, her grin widening, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long. Jane stumbled back, a scream rising in her throat. A memory, vivid and terrifying, flashed through Jane's mind. She was 8 years old again, hiding in the dusty attic of the house. Her parents were fighting, their raised voices echoing up through the floorboards. She covered her ears, her small body trembling.
Then the giggling. It started softly, a gentle tinkling sound, but it grew louder, more insistent. Jane peeked out from behind her hands. The girl with the pigtails stood in the middle of the attic, her dark eyes gleaming with an unsettling light.
Don't worry, the girl whispered, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. I'll make them stop.
"Who are you?" Jane whispered, her voice trembling, barely able to get the words out. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum.
The girl in the mirror stepped out, her movements fluid and unnatural, as if she were gliding on air. The room seemed to grow colder with each step she took, the temperature dropping noticeably. Her pigtails swayed gently, as if caught in an unseen breeze, moving in a rhythm that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. It was as if the very air around her was alive, responding to her presence. She tilted her head to the side, her black eyes boring into Jane's as if trying to peer into her very soul. The intensity of her gaze was almost unbearable, a dark void that seemed to pull Jane in.
Don't you remember? The girl asked, her voice a chilling melody that sent shivers down Jane's spine. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing in the corners of the room. We used to be friends. The words hung in the air, heavy with a past that Jane could barely recall. Images of two young girls playing together flashed through her mind, a distant memory that felt like a lifetime ago.
"Why are you doing this?" Jane choked out, tears streaming down her face. Her voice was a mix of fear and desperation, a plea for understanding in a situation that made no sense.
The girl with the pigtails took a step closer, her smile widening into something that was more a grimace than a grin. It was a smile devoid of warmth, filled only with malice and intent.
"We're going to play, Jane," she whispered, her breath cold against Jane's ear. "Forever." The word lingered, a promise and a threat all at once, sending a fresh wave of terror through Jane.
Jane's scream echoed through the empty house, swallowed by the shadows. It was a scream that spoke of pure, unadulterated fear, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Whether the scream was one of terror or acceptance, no one could tell. It was a sound that could have meant many things, a final cry in the face of the unknown. The house stood silent, its secrets locked within its decaying walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its threshold. It was a place of forgotten memories and lingering spirits, a testament to the passage of time and the stories left untold.